This script is a spoken adaptation of a doctoral level philosophy essay I authored on the distinction between free will and free choice. The original essay presents a compatibilist rejection of metaphysical voluntarism, arguing that while human agents lack free will understood as ultimate self-origination, they retain free choice as a functionally grounded, reason-responsive capacity. For this format, the core arguments, structure and conclusions of the essay have been preserved and reworked for oral delivery without dilution of conceptual rigor. Philosophical references are used sparingly and only where they directly intersect with the argument. The full academic essay is available on request. A compatibilist rejection of metaphysical voluntarism. Let me start where the confusion always begins. Humans are said to have free will. By this, we usually mean something very specific, even if we rarely spell it out. We mean that a person is the ultimate origin of their actions, that under identical conditions they could genuinely have done otherwise, that their will at the decisive moment stands apart from the causal history that produced it. This idea has dominated metaphysics, moral philosophy, and legal theory for centuries. It underwrites our strongest intuitions about love, blame, praise, and punishment, but it is no longer defensible. Not once we take seriously what we now know about the mind, the brain, and the causal structure of the world. What I am arguing is not that humans lack agency, it is that we have misunderstood where agency lives. Humans possess free choice, understood as a capacity for deliberative selection among represented alternatives. Humans do not possess free will, understood as metaphysically unconstrained self-origination, and failing to distinguish those two has warped the entire debate. What free will actually commits us to? Free will, in its strongest and most traditional formulation, makes three commitments. These are not optional. Remove any one of them, and the view collapses into something else. First, ultimacy. The agent must be the final explanatory source of their intentions and actions. Second, alternative possibilities. Given precisely the same total conditions, the agent could have acted otherwise. Third, causal independence. The will must not be fully determined by prior physical or psychological states. Taken together, these commitments require a form of agent causation that cannot be reduced to ordinary event causation. The will must initiate causal chains without itself being fully caused. This is where the position breaks. Because once you look at it carefully, free will faces a dilemma it cannot escape. If an action is caused by prior states, then it is determined. If it is not caused, then it is random. Neither option gives you the kind of control libertarian free will requires. Randomness does not produce authorship, it undermines it. This is not a gap in science, it is a structural contradiction in the concept itself. That is why free will, defined this way, demands an exemption from the causal structure of reality that has no empirical support and no conceptual coherence. A brief historical sidestep and why it fails. Some philosophers recognized this problem early. Immanuel Kant, for example, accepted that empirical human action is governed by causal law. His solution was to relocate freedom elsewhere, not in the phenomenal world we observe, but in a noumenal self beyond time, causation, and explanation. Freedom becomes something we must postulate for moral reasons, not something we can ever identify and experience. That move is revealing. When a concept can only survive by leaving the world entirely, it tells us something important about the concept. What it tells us is that free will is being asked to do more work than it can sustain. Why indeterminism does not say free will? At this point, some turn to indeterminism. Perhaps they suggest quantum uncertainty introduces genuine alternatives that restore freedom, but indeterminism does not help. Randomness does not confer agency. A decision caused by probabilistic fluctuation is no more freely willed than one caused by deterministic processes. In fact, indeterminism actively undermines the very features agency requires. Agency depends on reliability, on coherence, on responsiveness to reasons. Randomness erodes all three. So whether the universe is deterministic or indeterministic, libertarian free will fails. Either way, the will is not the kind of thing it claims to be. The core distinction: free choice. Rejecting free will does not mean rejecting agency. The mistake has always been to conflate metaphysical ultimacy with functional autonomy. Free choice is not the capacity to act outside causation. It is the capacity of a cognitive system to operate within it in a particular way. Free choice consists in the ability to represent multiple courses of action, evaluate those options in light of goals, values, and anticipated outcomes, inhibit some impulses in favor of others, act in ways that track reasons rather than immediate stimulus alone. These capacities are empirically observable. They are developmentally variable. They can be strengthened, impaired, or lost. They depend on executive function, memory, integration, affect regulation, and social learning. Crucially, none of this requires exemption from causality. Free choice is therefore emergent rather than fundamental. It arises from complex interactions within deterministic systems, much as computation arises from physical substrates. Emergence here does not mean magic. It means explanatory autonomy at the level where function matters. A pressure point, not a detour. Harry Frankfurt is useful here for one reason only. He destroys the idea that moral responsibility requires the ability to do otherwise. Frankfurt-style cases show that an agent can be responsible even when no genuine alternative was available, provided the action issues from the agent's internal organization. That insight aligns perfectly with the free choice account. Where Frankfurt stops short is in treating identification as if it floats free of causal history, but that is not a flaw to be repaired. It is the reality the theory points toward. Responsibility does not require self-creation, it requires self-regulation. Responsibility without metaphysical freedom. One of the most common objections to rejecting free will is that it supposedly undermines moral responsibility. That objection rests on a hidden assumption that responsibility requires ultimate self-origination. It does not. Responsibility is better grounded in an agent's capacity for normative responsiveness. Agents are responsible insofar as they can understand reasons, anticipate consequences, modify behavior in response to incentives and sanctions, learn from social feedback. These are functional capacities, not metaphysical achievements. They support a forward-looking account of responsibility, oriented toward regulation, deterrence, and moral development, rather than backward-looking metaphysical blame. On this view, responsibility is scalar, not absolute. It varies with cognitive capacity, situational constraint, and developmental stage. This is not revisionary. It is already how moral and legal practices actually operate. P.F. Strawson was right that responsibility is embedded in social practices. Where he stops at description, free choice provides justification. Reactive attitudes are appropriate only when directed at agents capable of responding to them. The self without the myth. Traditional free will presupposes a unified, enduring self standing apart from its determinants. But contemporary philosophy of mind tells a different story. The self is better understood as a dynamic, distributed system. Decision-making emerges from competition and coordination among neural subsystems shaped by prior conditioning. Conscious awareness plays an integrative and narrative role, but it is not the initiator of action in the libertarian sense. This does not make agency illusory. It reframes it. The agent is not a prime mover. It is a structured system capable of self-regulation over time. That is all agency ever needed to be. Free will, understood as metaphysical self-origination, unconstrained by causal antecedents, is not defensible. It rests on assumptions incompatible with a naturalistic understanding of the mind and collapses under its own internal contradictions. Free choice, by contrast, survives scrutiny. As an emergent capacity for deliberative, reason-responsive action within constraints, it preserves meaningful agency without invoking metaphysical exceptionalism. The distinction between free will and free choice is not semantic, it is foundational. It allows philosophy to retain responsibility, autonomy, and moral evaluation while abandoning incoherent metaphysical commitments. In doing so, it replaces an aspirational mythology of freedom with a disciplined account of human agency as it actually exists. Not left, not right, just real.